50 years ago, Walt Disney created a motion picture masterpiece that would become one of the greatest films of all time and brought to life a little hero who charmed audiences all over the world. It's Walt Disney's classic, Pinocchio, for anyone who's ever wished upon a star.
Specifically for those who wish this to be one of their live-action remakes. I don't know who wished for it, but here you go! Okay, all joking aside, I know that the idea of this picture alone is far from appealing to anyone. I mean, you're taking what could be considered the Citizen Kane of animation and turn that into one of their mechanically made and subpar live-action remakes like they did before with Sleeping Beauty, Dumbo, Beauty and the Beast, and many more. Just the thought of that alone can make any movie fan go, But if I can be fair for just one moment, it does seem like Disney has some awareness that they should take this remake a bit more seriously. Yes, they put this on Disney Plus instead of the big screen, but that doesn't change how they want to give this some quality with well-known Hollywood veterans and prominent award contenders attached to it, like Tom Hanks, Cynthia Erivo, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and of course, having legendary director Robert Zemeckis leading this project to bring this masterpiece to a whole new dimension.
Bob is one of these filmmakers that takes you to places beyond your expectations. I think every audience wishes to be transported. That's the magic of cinema. Great movies last forever.
Let me clarify that as a Disney fan and a cartoon fan myself, I really do like Pinocchio. I truly think that it is phenomenal. Even after 80 years, it is one of the greatest animated achievements that very few could ever manage to reach its level. I mean, the animation itself is masterclass, the emotions are effectively powerful, the characters are unforgettably charming, it has an admirably timeless feel, and do I have to mention that it's the home of When You Wish Upon a Star?
When you wish upon a star.
Let's be real though, there is no way that this movie can be as good as the original 1940 film. I mean, we need to accept the fact that the standards are just way too high for that. But that doesn't mean that it's over for this remake just yet. If it can be able to stand well on its own with its own brand of quality that's pretty enjoyable, and can be distinctively different enough from the animated film, then I think maybe we could have something worthwhile here. Then again, considering that 2022 seems to be the year of Pinocchio movies for some reason, the very least that I could ask for is that this movie can end up becoming better than...
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
Mamma mia! It wouldn't buy!
Come on, Disney, the bar is set pretty low for you right now. There's no way that you can go and mess this up, right? Well, there is actually some good news and bad news. The good news is that there is a prominent difference between this movie and the original animated version, so you don't have to worry about this being nothing more but a live-action copy. The bad news is that what makes this different is that whatever the animated movie did well, the live-action version completely messed it up. It's funny how this one is several minutes longer than the original, yet this somehow always feels like it's in a hurry to get through one scene after another. Technically, this is the same story that we all know along with some extra additions meant to expand the world, but it's just so hard to get engaged with whatever's happening because the pacing is so aggressively quick. In about every scene, it throws all these crazy ideas and weird interpretations of what we're familiar with, and never once does it calm down for us to register what we've just witnessed. You'll be watching Pinocchio and Jiminy getting out of Stromboli's wagon after quickly solving Pinocchio's lying problem, and then suddenly, he's on another wagon next to the coachman and Lampwick and is off to Pleasure Island. You'll be given a lot of things from this movie, but a break is not one of them.
Can you imagine the trouble he's gonna get into?
Well, I wouldn't want that on my conscience.
And with the way that it rushes through everything, it gives little time to make a significance with any new idea that it wants to propose. I'll give it that it does have a few good suggestions that could have worked, if done well, like Geppetto's loneliness and how he misses his loved ones, or a kind-hearted puppeteer who helps Pinocchio get through Stromboli's cruelty. However, their purpose is only quickly glanced through and don't do much to help Pinocchio's journey to becoming a real boy other than to get him from one place to another. Not to mention that a lot of what it proposes are completely out of place. Regardless of whatever new musical number it wants to include that end up feeling like they stop halfway through anyways, most of the extra elements it tries to bring in sticks out like a sore thumb and end up making you question if it's even necessary. Like, do we honestly need a sassy bird in this adventure? Or have a ballerina puppet do the tango?
All you need is your feet and the beat and the floor. You'll find your flow and that's when you let go.
But not only is the entire feature rushed, the ending also has the same issue where the movie feels like it suddenly stops. At this point, I'll be going into some significant spoilers, so if you don't want to know, then skip to here and you'll be fine. Anyways, you'd think Pinocchio would just turn into a real boy and everyone lives happily ever after, right? Sadly, this wish did not get granted. After escaping Monstro by having Pinocchio become a super speed swimmer, because I guess being a puppet means having the same abilities as Dash from The Incredibles, we get the old cliche of thinking Geppetto is dead and everyone around him is sad. Luckily, the writers decided that Pikachu has some great screenwriting tips and gave Pinocchio magical tears that brought Geppetto back to life, and they all walk out of the cave and... that's it! The film decided to just end it right there. We don't know if Pinocchio becomes real. It decided that it's tired and just literally closed the book on the whole thing. But you see the problem here? It's real bad that it had to end it off this way, but that's how it's been with the whole movie. It's just an endless cycle of crazy moments with little explanation handled by broken down writing, all in an attempt to tell this spontaneously chaotic version of Disney's Pinocchio.
And it's smooth sailing from here.
Alt! Get out! Get out and stay out!
I think it's safe to say that the writing here is an absolute bust. But don't worry, it's fine. Writing and storytelling have never been the main selling points of these live-action remakes in the first place. What people actually do want to see from a Disney live-action remake is big-name stars take on the roles of iconic and classic Disney characters. And considering that this movie has a prominent all-star cast, including Tom Hanks, Cynthia Erivo, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Keegan-Michael Key, Luke Evans, again, I'm sure that they could put in a unique twist to these beloved icons. And you know what? They certainly have. But keep in mind that I said unique. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were good. You'd think that having recognizable professionals could help make things better with some solid acting. But nope. For one reason or another, we end up with all these botched up versions of classic characters who either have none of the charm of their original counterpart, or the materials that they were given were hopeless. Generally, the biggest issue with the acting is how over the top everyone tries to be. I don't know if it's either the actors themselves or due to the directing, but they all try too hard to sell their characters and their performances, where everything they do just feels forced and spoils the experience. Yes, this is technically a fairy tale and a Disney movie, but that's no excuse to not take your role even somewhat seriously. Granted, I will say that there are a few that can make it work. They play their over-the-top nature well, where they can be a bit fun to watch at times, like Giuseppe Battiston as Stromboli, Louis Lloyd as Lampwick, and even Luke Evans as the coachman can have his moments.
A killjoy who apparently doesn't believe in having fun. I mean, who doesn't believe in transformative experiences?
However, I'd say that the best actors are only the ones that appear on camera, and even that varies with different people. Some actors I can tell are fine here, but it's the materials that they have to work with that feels, again, absolutely hopeless. Like, the Blue Fairy's attitude makes her feel more like she's a Shrek version of herself, Fabiana is only there for brief moral support, and Tom Hanks' Geppetto often feels more like a confused old man.
You did all that in one day? Yeah. My goodness, I haven't done a fraction of that in my whole life!
But the worst offenders of being badly over the top are the voices. They can generally be annoying at times, although I could give Pinocchio a bit of a pass because he's just trying to emulate the performance of the original, but the worst ones are Keegan-Michael Key as Honest John and Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Jiminy Cricket. You got Key, who turned John into a desperate comedian who doesn't want to leave until he gets a single laugh.
Slab Oakley. Chad Log? I've got it. Chris Pine. Nah, it'd never work.
And as for Gordon-Levitt, what the fridge was he doing behind the mic? This isn't Jiminy Cricket. This sounds more like an exaggerated impression of Jiminy Cricket. Like, the more I listen to him, the more I feel like Jiminy is turning into an old prospector.
Never understood that expression. How can you be once upon a time? Hey, who's telling this story? Me or you?
Well, if the writing can't save this movie and the actors are just making things worse, then that only leaves one man who could go and possibly salvage this whole movie. And that is the leader of the project, Robert Zemeckis. And like I said before, Robert Zemeckis is a legendary director and a title that is truly earned, especially when he was the one who actually directed many of what can be considered some of the greatest movies of all time. I mean, we're talking about the guy who is responsible for Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I mean, if there is anyone who is able to do justice to a live-action remake of Pinocchio, or Disney's Pinocchio, may I add, it's gotta be Robert Zemeckis. But then suddenly, you have to take a moment and think about what you just said. And there's actually a dark truth to that statement that you might have possibly forgotten. Because all of those great movies that I've mentioned, that's actually from 20th century Zemeckis. 21st century Zemeckis, on the other hand... Don't get me wrong, Zemeckis has done a lot of amazing work and he is an admirable filmmaker. But when he got a hold of that motion capture technology and entered the world of CGI, his works never captured that same magical spark like they used to. It's like if he shifted his priorities where they were less about the storytelling and more about the visuals and make whatever is in his imagination look as real as possible. Even if it's been over a decade since his animation studio closed down, there's still that part of him to this day that still wants to make those mocap animated features like he did before. It shows with Welcome to Marwen, it shows with The Witches, and it definitely shows with Pinocchio. However, despite his ambitions to keep on bringing his visual style to life, it's never been, beloved by the public, to put it nicely. And it's ironic too, considering how this joke was on the same platform a few months prior.
I can't tell. He's got those polar express eyes.
Many issues with Zemeckis' CG style have already been talked about before, but this is quite a highlight of what doesn't work with it. In the case of Pinocchio, this could almost be considered an animated film because of how it's so dependent on it. Actually, it's almost laughable the way that it uses CG for almost everything. It's blatantly obvious whenever Tom Hanks has to play with thin air to let the visual effects team add the rest in post. I mean, even Pinocchio before he came to life had to be CGI. Come on, was that necessary? You can't let Tom play with real puppets? So yeah, not a good look when the CG itself doesn't blend well with its live-action environment. This is especially worse when another Zemeckis-style problem kicks in where the visuals want to look realistic so badly. And yet, on his pursuit of applying realism to the 1940 film, it ends up making the picture look disturbingly uncanny. With maybe the only exception being Pinocchio himself, because he does stay very true to his animated version. There's like this obvious disconnect going on where the characters' behavior and their movements are meant to be more like cartoons, yet the way they're supposed to look like they belong in the real world makes them extremely off-putting and sometimes a nightmare to look at. The only time this actually works is during Lampwick's transformation scene.
You might want to check. What do I look like to you? A jackass!
Well, the CG in general is already horrific, so, at least it got something right. But the realism isn't the only issue here. It's also how it implements so much detail into everything. Actually, there's too much detail. It's like if the movie wants to fill the screen with so many things at once that it becomes difficult to know where the eye should focus, like in Pleasure Island. Not to mention how the cinematography always behaves like a roller coaster and makes the viewing experience nauseating with the camera flinging around everywhere. It's kind of hard to know where I should be looking at when the movie is making me dizzy at the same time. On a side note, I will say that Pleasure Island is probably the only background that looks bad for being way too cluttered with stuff. The other places and their use of color actually look pretty nice, as they did a great job recreating the original's locations and adapting them into the third dimension, like with Geppetto's workshop. Minus the fact of how he's an unapologetic Disney fanboy.
Die!
But back to the details, the problem is especially prevalent with the characters, where they can have so much on them that their designs become distracting and even misses the point of the original's look. Now, let's take a moment to hear a fun fact. Back when they were making the original Pinocchio, Walt Disney and animator Ward Kimball had to go through several designs for Jiminy in order to make him look more appealing and less bug-like. Down to the point where he looks nothing like a cricket and more like a tiny little man. The remake proves exactly why he shouldn't have those cricket components. Even if his new design remains a bit true to the original, his extra insect layers make him look like he's made out of metal. If I didn't know any better, I thought he was one of those rejected robots from the Epic Mickey game.
More or less. Now quit telling those whoppers.
Another character who has way too much detail is Monstro. Everyone knows him as the Angry Whale, right? Well, apparently that's not enough for this remake, so why don't we just add some extra crap on his body and even some tentacles? Yes, you heard me right, Monstro now has tentacles. Because I've always wanted a freaking kaiju on my adaptation of Disney's Pinocchio!
But it wasn't a whale. It was a sea monster, and we got out.
Yes, the picture has so many problems, but when you sit down and actually think about it, the movie only has one problem. Yes, it is very difficult to go through a whole bunch of bad stuff only to go and find a handful of good things to say about it, but everything wrong with the picture actually all comes down to the same issue. The movie just tries way too hard. I know it's not much of a surprise to say that Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio is not a good movie on the count of the fact that it's a Disney live-action remake. And yet, even by Disney live-action remake standards, this movie is quite subpar, and it's all because it tries way too hard at everything to the point that it no longer becomes enjoyable. The story tries too hard to be an exciting adventure, the actors try too hard with their performances, the visuals try too hard to be realistic and detailed, and it tries too hard to implement new ideas with so little time. I'll admit that there are a handful of elements that are good and well done, including a lovely score by Alan Silvestri, but they're not enough to make the picture worthwhile. Especially when we know that there's already a better version of the film that exists and is available to watch on the same platform. That's why it's hard for me to recommend this movie to anyone. Maybe it's worth seeing once just to say that you at least saw it, but in the long run, you're better off to just stick with the animated classic anyways. And while you're at it, you might as well subscribe to my channel. Trust me when I say that making crazy reviews like this is just the tip of the iceberg with me. Ultimately, as a remake, it fails to prove the need of its existence. And while it's probably debatable if this is the worst Disney live-action remake, this is easily a strong contender. And that's why I'm giving this a 4 out of 10 and the Animat seal of garbage. Now, if you excuse me, I'm gonna go wash this off with Pinocchio: A True Story. Yes, it's technically worse, but at least I can have an unintentional good time with Pauly Shore's performance.
Let's go, Tybalt! Great adventures await!
You did all that in one day?